The question is strengthened when one consults the major Rishonim as to how they interpret Tofel v'Lavan and Di Zahav. Firstly, the Rashbam, who incidentally does a very strange thing in separating the Lavan from the Tofel. Under the heading V'Lavan v'Chatzerot v'Di Zahav, the Rashbam writes, Hakol Mekomot, Lefi Pshuto. The way he understands the Pshuta Shel Mikra, Lavan, Chatzerot and Di Zahav are all locations. And in support of his thesis that Di Zahav was a city named after a ruler, he refers us to Bereshit 36, Pasuk 39, the segment of Chumash devoted to the Toldot Esav, the Esav dynasty. Towards the end of the Perek we have a listing of a series of kings that ruled Be'eretz Edom. We are informed that Baal Hanan ben Achbor died. Rulership was handed over to Hadar, that his city-state was Pa'ul, and his wife's name was Mehetabel. It is somewhat of an anomaly that with all the other kings we mentioned the king and the city from which he ruled, whom the respective kings married was not information that needed to be recorded in the Chumash text, whereas with Hadar, not only do we mention the city from which he ruled, but we also mention his wife and his father-in-law. The name of his wife was Mehetabel. She was Bat Mi Zahav. Clearly Mehetabel did not have two fathers. For this reason Rashi understands that the statement Bat Mi Zahav is providing an alternative label to her real father Matred. Rashi then goes on to clarify the meaning of this nickname, that Mi Zahav means Mahu Zahav, an individual who had so much wealth that Zahav, that gold, was a meaningless item, possibly something akin to the mythical King Midas. And if one wants to think outside the box, Rashi's explanation for Mi Zahav is not very different to his interpretation of V'di Zahav, an abundance of Zahav. Nevertheless, in light of the fact that there was an individual who had a nickname of Mi Zahav, it is therefore quite conceivable, from the standpoint of the Rashbam, that the reference of Di Zahav is to a city that is somehow linked to Matred, the father of Mehetabel. The Ibn Ezra, under the heading of Paran, Tofel, Lavan, Chatzerot, V'Di Zahav, writes clearly that these are Mekomot. However, these are not Mekomot that will be found amongst the 42 cities listed in Parashat Masa'eh, in which the Bnei Israel set up camp during the 40 years that they were required to remain in the Midbar. And finally, the Chizkuni, under the heading Bein Tofel v'Lavan, writes Yesh lanu lomar mekor shikol svara, that logical analysis will lead us to conclude that Mekomot Heim, that Tofel and Lavan are actual locations, and then goes on to write V'chein v'Di Zahav. Similarly, the reference to Di Zahav, although not mentioned in the text elsewhere, is also to be understood as a makom, a particular place. And all of this reinforces the question that we have raised: why is it that Rashi does not seem to treat Tofel v'Lavan nor Di Zahav as a place, and for which he needs to reinforce the concept that by Moshe mentioning the four words in Pasuk Aleph, they come as a rebuke to the Bnei Israel.